Thanks for tuning in to the Lean 911 podcast, where you'll have a voice directly from the Gemba. I will rely on my 3 decades of Lean successes, as well as my failures, to answer your most challenging questions regarding your Lean transformation. I'm your host, Mark DeLuzio, President and CEO of Lean Horizons Consulting, and the Principal Architect of the Danaher Business System. Looking forward to your questions. Now, let's go to the Gemba.
Hi, this is Mark DeLuzio. Welcome to the Lean 911 podcast, where we're going to be talking to Joe Rutz today. This is episode 26, and if you're following along anyway. And Joe Rutz is a longtime friend and colleague. I met Joe at Danaher when his company was acquired in the mid to late 90s in the Motion Group. And Joe and I immediately bonded, and basically, long story short, we traveled the world together, not only integrating acquisitions, but developing Danaher's mergers and acquisitions integration process itself. And so we've been quite a few places, created all kinds of havoc around the world, Joe. And so Joe Rutz, I'll let you maybe take a couple seconds. Joe's with Lean Horizons. He's a managing director with Lean Horizons. And what we're going to talk about today is Lean in administration. Okay. And Joe also has an IT background along with manufacturing. He's Apex certified, so he knows his way around the shop. He has a lot of skills, but he was the one that really helped us at Danaher and part of the team when we built the Danaher Business System to bring a different aspect into how we look at administrative processes, and also as it relates to IT. And I'll let Joe talk about why IT is important, but some of the guidelines around that in terms of how you have to think about IT when you actually are trying to affect and change an administrative work stream. So, Joe, I'll let you say a few words about yourself, and then maybe we can get going.
Excellent. Mark, thank you for inviting me to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about my background. I started in aerospace and defense, working on military defensive weapons, moved into some consulting with IBM. While I was working, I started in operations and I moved into information technology, putting in ERP systems from a functional responsibility standpoint. And then I started helping companies make the transition. After doing a brief stint of consulting, I went into a capital goods company and I got involved in Lean, doing Lean transformation. And as Mark talked about, Danaher then acquired us. And I met Mark and we took it to the next stage and drove Lean implementation, not just in manufacturing, but we had a business case where we had to work on our front end side of the business because we went into system solutions versus individual product sales. And in doing so, we had to redo our customer service, our sales cycle, our support cycle. And in that, we also went from 28 ERP systems to one global system and used IT as an enabler for the business processes. After that, I joined Mark in consulting, went into a generic pharmaceutical, trying to help in developing products that become more price competitive for the consumers, the patients. And I went back to consulting with Mark. So Mark and I have worked for 30 some years, and we've had a checkered past of opportunities around the world. So it's a pleasure to be here.
And the real reason I worked with Joe is because he knew where all the good restaurants were in Europe. So, so anyway, Joe, thanks for taking the time today. And again, you're managing director with Lean Horizons, and Joe runs a lot of different clients and accounts and oversees the transformation. And that's one thing that we always talk about is the transformation. And you cannot talk about, I don't think, a Lean transformation, Joe, without talking about how the whole non-manufacturing part of the business works, or even if you're not in manufacturing, you and I work together in insurance, we work together in financial services, pharmaceutical, all kinds of different applications. And as we all know, Lean applies to anything. It could be a lemonade stand. It doesn't matter. So maybe we start out by talking a little bit about your thoughts on how do you look at, Joe, an administrative process as compared to a discrete, classic manufacturing process where you got products, you got widgets, you create cells, you do all the things that you do with the hardware, if you will, and also the software with the people. But as you look at administration, give me your thoughts on admin and how you look at it and how you think it's the same and maybe how you also think it's different.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Great question. Yeah, so there are some parallels to certain administration processes where you can follow the product. For example, order entry, where you can say, okay, I have the contact with the customer, I receive the order, and you can go step by step and see the order actually uh, evolve. And you can find opportunities to take out waste based on the eight waste, and you can streamline that process. There's other administration processes that you don't have the ability to follow the process. For example, the R&D process, or even the closing process from a financial monthly close process, where there are parallel activities that are happening, and you can't follow the value object, and you have to take a different approach, looking at it as non-transactional. And but they both have the same opportunities. We take the basic concept of identifying where we have waste and how do we eliminate that. We still look at first pass yield. Uh, Typically in administration, it's not a reject, but it might be waiting for information, where we have to go back to an upstream operation or process and say, okay, how do we get the right information when it comes through? We can pick up the product, the output of that process, and be able to process it all the way through. So similar concepts, but yet a little harder, I think, on some of them, because you can't go out to Gemba and physically touch the product and watch it evolve.
Yeah, a lot of the work, if you will, is inside a computer somewhere and you can't see it.
Absolutely.
Which is one of the problems I think with administration is that it's not visible all the time. But well, that's interesting. So John, use the word value object. Maybe you can explain to the listeners what you mean by value object.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Yeah. So if we think about it, when we do a value stream mapping process and we're doing something such as a manufacturing, we'll pick the value object. For example, if we're
Mhm.
looking at the engine build process, we might make the value object the engine block. And what we want to do is follow that engine block, use it to figure out what the inventory is sitting out through the whole value stream, understand what it takes from the beginning all the way through the end. And the delivery of that engine includes an engine block. For an administrative item, we might have an item called a customer order. That becomes the value object. Again, we look at customer orders. We count the number of orders that are sitting at different steps of the process. And we use that to actually calculate lead time based on the daily demand. So it's something that we use to follow an item through a process when it's transactional driven.
So, for example, order entry you mentioned would be an order.
Correct.
Purchasing might be a purchase order. Accounts payable might be an invoice, and so forth. Even in HR, could be a performance review.
Could be a performance review, or it could even be a employee requisition, how we walk it through the process to evolve into a hiring decision.
Sure. Yeah, the requisition itself, right?
Mm.
So you and I worked on a client. We won't mention names here, but one of them was engineering change orders. Okay, ECOs, and you're the one that came up and said, "Well, Mark, wait a minute now. Why are we going to get good at ECOs?" And what we did in that case was, and I give you a lot of credit on this, is we looked at ECOs and we said to ourselves, "Well, wait a minute. Nobody ever writes an ECO when good things happen." Okay. So we redefine an ECO as a form of a defect because it was at a rework, right?
Absolutely. In fact, that was one of the measurements we put in place is after initial release, how many ECOs do we have? Because that means we had a breakdown in the process,
Yeah.
what we actually did to design change.
Yeah. I mean, why would I want to get good at that? Right. And so, but that's a different way of thinking that you brought to the table, even at Danaher when we started, creating the, if you will, the non-manufacturing side of DBS. And then the other thing we did with those ECOs is let's use them as data and start creating Pareto diagrams as to what type of ECOs, maybe we have software issues. So let's put those together. Then we break that down even further. Maybe it's electrical, maybe it's hardware, maybe it's, in even the specs that come in from the customer. Is it always the same sales guy? Is it always the same customer? Is it always the same type of issue around a defect on the ECO? In other words, what went wrong with that spec? What went wrong with that order?
Ab-
Why do we need to look
Absolutely,
parts? So
Mark.
all that you says is gold, if you will, to solve problems.
Absolutely. If you take the view as an ECO as a failure, now there are some ECOs that are improvement that make it better. The question is,
Sure.
how can I find those when I'm doing the initial design? But if you say, okay, the majority of ECOs are to fix something,
Right.
one of the key principles from a lean standpoint is use data to help drive where your root causes are. And
Right.
it allowed us to get some determination and start slicing and dicing to get to the root cause, solve that so we don't have that problem again.
Yeah. And yeah, the one that we worked on, though, I think a predominant amount of the ECOs were fixes. They weren't like improvements, as you said.
Absolutely.
And I think that's true for almost everyone I've seen, every client, every company I've seen. It's always trying to fix a problem. Well, Joe, let me ask you this question. So, earlier you mentioned ERP, and there's a lot of confusion around ERP, especially as it relates to MRP, which, ultimately evolved into ERP, this all encompassing system that everything's tied together: order entry, accounting, planning, materials, everything's in this one universal ERP enterprise system, in of which MRP was one part of it, right? But your experience with MRP systems in general, what are your thoughts on that? Now, again, Joe, just to let you know, Joe's got an Apex certification, which is the, certificate in production inventory management. I have the same certificate, but Joe always tells me, well, I'm a fellow and you're not. So I just thought I'd throw that out there before you said that. Okay.
I'm happy to see, Mark, that you remembered some of your certification, but absolutely. Yes, I was involved in MRP back in the very beginning, where we started to put a system in place
Right.
for financial controls, but also being able to work what's happening in the factory and use MRP to help plan for the consumption of products, ordering and all that. And typically what happens is, if we go back a number of years, is people became so enamored with MRP that they stopped using, and they use the system to drive behavior. And what we try and do from a lean perspective is use visual signals, or what we call Kanban, to drive demand instead of a signal from the system. We want a visual card. And what we want to do is integrate that with the ERP system, but let the visual card, so we limit our ability to build up excess product. We want to have enough product to keep the product moving. And we want a signal to make it very simple, instead of having to look at reports, get action reports out of MRP that says, okay, go do this. Very clearly say, I have a signal. I go against a blanket order I have with the supplier, and I send a signal to the supplier to replenish. In a lot of cases, I don't need to use the sourcing team to actually communicate that signal to the supplier. I can do that with the person on the floor sending the signal, and I can have sourcing actually work on quality, help us find the right products at the right time to meet our requirements.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other notion too, Joe, as you and I know, is when you go to a pull system, ideally a flow system, but if you can't flow, you pull, you want to go to single point scheduling. So where MRP would schedule every process known to man within the company, none of them ever coordinated. And the whole notion of economic order quantity, which is a big, metric in MRP, basically says, well, we want to eliminate the need. I'm sorry, we want to reduce the number of changeovers. Where you and I are sitting here saying, no, we want to change over more. Ideally, get to no touch or one touch changeover. You were just in India with me, in 3 days, you worked on reducing changeover time on some key processes by about 90%.
Yeah,
And yeah,
absolutely. What we did there is we had three different teams working on how to uh, eliminate or reduce the setup time so we could actually produce the product when we need it for the customer. And it allowed us to to go to multiple cycles of scheduling the product using a pull process instead of trying to schedule for the whole month. Because what happens is you're stealing capacity for a customer's product that they actually need when you try and
Yeah.
optimize. And
Right.
what we is instead of saying, okay, how do we do that? We reduced our setup time by 94%, 92%, which means it no longer was a big issue to do a setup change.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, in the whole notion and the mindset that has to happen is instead of the mindset of avoiding setups, we want to do more setups.
Absolutely.
And as you said, don't steal capacity on one part number when you can't sell it for another one, right? So anyway, that's a whole behavioral thing. But anyway, I'm just tying that back into MRP thinking and how MRP is kind of counter to it's actually a batch process, right? But getting back to administration, Joe. So I always insisted, and so have you. I always want an IT person on the Kaizen team when we're doing admin, because inevitably you're going to have to affect some IT system somewhere along the line. And how many times have you heard, "Oh, the system won't let us do that," which I know drives you nuts. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
for the system, or who do we work for here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in a lot of cases, uh, especially at Danaher Motion and the pharmaceutical companies, I insisted that we have IT resources in process improvement events
Yep.
because we typically have the capability already there. It doesn't require anything new. And we can, instead of having to go through a long cycle of submitting a request during the event, in a lot of cases, we can solve the problem, provide the data without having to do a lot of work because you just don't know, or the operators or the people doing the job just don't know what's capable.
And so you're saying you make the changes right there in the Kaizen event.
Absolutely. I mean, we still use a control process, but in the goal of a 5-day event or a 4-day event is actually build it in the sandbox, test it out,
Yeah.
move it into approval cycle and get it approved and get it put into production during that event.
So you taught us at Danaher, and I'm not sure if they're still thinking this way, but when it comes to an IT solution, and I use that word loosely, okay? Uh, um, the word solution. What's your thoughts around that? What's some of the ground rules that you kind of created to think about how IT applies to let's say an administrative Kaizen?
Well, first of all, you said something. Are we working for the system or is the system working for us?
Right.
What we want to do is improve the process first, simplify the process, then look for IT solutions to help support that. In fact, you could use it to actually create your standard work and poke a yoke or foolproof or error proof some steps and use the system as a constraint. So I've always viewed, first of all, I want IT involved in there, from a knowledge transfer, but also from a development standpoint, we understand the business we're supporting versus
Yep.
supporting the system.
Yep.
You made a comment about MRP, but the one thing I forgot to add is when you put in a push system like MRP, you end up having to work to all the messages instead of actually getting product to be built. You're rescheduling everything because a single point schedule. So you're having to do a lot of work. What we want to do, not just in the manufacturing, but in the administration, is have the system work for us. Use it when we need it from a control standpoint,
Mhm.
providing some visibility. But how can we trigger and make this, the process work the best way? And then in a lot of cases, even when I look at ERP systems, is don't customize the system.
Yeah.
Make it work for you because your old processes that you've done for years, what are you trying to solve for? What are we trying to look at? And let's make it work for us without having modifications. But absolutely, IT involvement is critical. In fact, at Danaher, my development team were all certified facilitators of using value stream mapping and process mapping.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Joe, how many times have you seen whether it's workarounds or spreadsheets that are kind of working because the system doesn't do this and do that. But when you really look at it, the capability does exist. We just went through this in India. The capability does exist within the system, but nobody knows about it, or we're just not using it. And there are features that just haven't been turned on. How often have you seen that?
Well, and yet I'm smiling because Excel is the largest MRP scheduling system in the world. It was developed to actually help us do certain things, but the capabilities exploded where people are very comfortable with the tool, that they use it in place of using tools that are readily available. So one of the things we try and do is get rid of that. And when we value stream map, we'll actually count the number of different Excel schedules that are being used during a typical value stream mapping exercise. And the goal will be to eliminate those. How can we get to one place of truth? And if at all possible, out of the system, to give us one place of truth where the record is actually stored and communicated. So yeah, a lot of people are very comfortable with Excel, and they'll pull information out and do just a slight operation, but it's different than the next downstream operation or a parallel operation. And then you spend all this time expediting. In fact, at one client, we had a hot list, a hot list, a hot list, a really hot list. And we're spending all the time and energy coordinating these, and I said, eliminate hot list. Why don't we try and create flow? And we had flow operating, and then we used pull, and we got rid of the whole, actually the dependency on the system. We actually used it to report for the financials, and we used it to basically track certain critical elements, but it was more of hey, this is what we did versus this is what we need to do.
A lot of times I call those workarounds,
Yep.
the process itself. And I'm not necessarily always talking about an IT process, but the process itself, you don't involve the operators or the users who, as we know, are your best consultants. So what they do is they say, okay, well, here's a system that, management created, and they want me to use it. And they think it's the best thing in the world since sliced bread, except for the fact they missed this, they missed that, they missed that. So we're going to do a bunch of workarounds because we can't go back until the emperor has no clothes. So we use his system, but we got all these workarounds, and a lot of times those workarounds turn into Excel spreadsheets. And
Absolutely.
you and I are the same page. It's interesting too, because when, you worked with me on lean accounting, when I developed that back at Danaher, and, God, I was just talking to my son Scott the other day about it, because he's working on lean accounting for a client. And, in his write-up, he said, he did a blog post. He said, lean accounting is a new concept. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. And I developed that in 1989. It's like almost 35 years old. It's not that new.
It takes some time.
That means that we're old, Joe. But but the thing about the whole notion of lean accounting, I think is resident in your thoughts on IT. In these workaround spreadsheets, is that we want to turn accountants, for example, into navigators, not historians. And how much time is spent just pumping data into these spreadsheets, as opposed to using the data to make decisions and to run the business and make improvements. I mean, that's kind of what you've seen, I believe, and in all these, again, I'm going to call them workarounds.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's another critical example of constructing the system to actually provide us the visibility at the value stream level, so
Right.
we can smart decisions and understand where the opportunities are as we work on safety, quality, delivery, and cost. We
Right.
can see the impact, and it'll drive better behavior, because as we, start driving to tighter areas, more efficiency and processing from the front end to the back end of delivery, that we get the visibility of the impact that it has. And again, instead of having to fill out a lot of information and feed the system, we're actually pulling out the data out of the system to give us better visibility to make better decisions.
Yeah, you and I worked with one pharmaceutical client that essentially just, packed pills into containers. And the manufacturing process, quite frankly, was relatively simple. It's the front end stuff with all the data and all the requirements and all the paperwork, and literally it was paperwork. That was, I would say, what would you say? 80% of the lead time was all that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And they didn't make product or they didn't pack pills. They made batch records was the joke because
Yes, that's right.
the documentation and the details called out took more time than the physical packing.
Yeah, I never seen anything like it. Yeah. And I've seen it in a lot of medical device companies too, where the paperwork will kill you, you know. And so you and I were at a client, um, again, to be unnamed, but I remember they were thinking about putting an ERP system in. And the CFO was touting all the benefits he's going to get from putting this ERP system in. And you and I just looking at each other saying, well, wait, because we had some semblance of a understanding of their processes, and their processes were quite frankly, you know, littered with waste, right? And your notion is, no, you take the waste out first. You don't automate waste, right? And that's kind of the mantra that you brought to Danaher. And that was basically our marching orders when we looked at these type of processes is we're not going to take an ERP system or any other kind of software and throw it over your existing process without first taking out the waste, right? Because otherwise you're just going to automate waste and you're going to screw up faster. Maybe,
Mhm.
maybe. So I said to the CFO, I said, after you got done telling, citing all the great benefits that they're going to get as an organization with this ERP system, I said to him, I said, geez, if it's that good, why don't you buy two? You know, I mean, y- y- you know, and that's where we went to work with them on holding them off. I actually had a client one time, um, that, that I convinced the CEO to put a 18-month halt on their SAP implementation. Okay. The SAP team was irate with me. They later thanked me because of waste stuff. And for example, they had 26 distribution centers around North America, Canada, North America. And when we really started looking at it, they only needed 11. They would have implemented SAP in 26 sites. We saved them up to millions of dollars on implementation costs. And there are other things we did too, relative to streamlining the processes. So they did come back and thank me, but man, it was tough at first because they just wanted to fundamentally get this thing implemented without really thinking about the business implications.
Well, one of my primary thinking is I'm not going to upgrade a system unless I have a true business case. Typically, it's not the fault of the system, it's how it was deployed or how we're utilizing or
Yep.
accuracy.
Yep.
Uh, at Danaher Motion, we had 28 ERPs and 42 locations. And we had to consolidate into one global system because we were changing our face to the customer. And we
Right.
didn't want them having to reach out to each plant to find out deliveries of our different components. We wanted one order, we would manage it. And then we used it to actually drive a lot of financial transactions between all of the uh, transfers, intercompany transfers. We got rid of that process and only had to do what we needed to do for legal reasons. So if I went from a product from Germany, I had a certain rate to do the transfer at, but I made it all automated. And what I focused on was getting the product to the customer. And we had one face to the customer. But that was a business reason. I don't upgrade systems unless I have a business reason. Just, if the system is working, then understand it. If it's not, let's understand which processes and look at those processes because anytime you upgrade a system, it's going to have an emphasis.
Well, I think that's the same notion that you and I use at Lean Horizons when we think about lean, because we're not going to go out and implement lean tools because it's fashionable. That's not the objective. The objective has to be the business objectives first,
Mhm.
um, and then move from there. Let's
Absolutely.
give a little bit of color what Joe's talking about on the motion group. So Danaher bought all these disparate companies that made all these different components, stepper motors and servo motors and ball screws, all kinds of different actuators. And the strategy was instead of selling individual components to a customer, we're going to take all these different, pieces of of a system and sell a system. So in other words, instead of selling individual components and getting whatever, margin off of that, you can now sell a system that has a lot more market value to a customer. It's a one-stop deal. And you can still keep all the great brand names for all the different components that are in there because they're meaningful, but we sold them as a consolidated system. So what did Joe do? He said, well, wait a minute now. We can no longer, have a business model that sells a servo motor because nobody's buying a servo motor when we move to this new process or, whatever it may be. So the business reason was I need one ERP system to be able to have that one face to the customer where the customer's not ordering with 500 different purchase orders for one system. Well, it wouldn't have been 500, but maybe 12, and from different companies. All right. And so it was a business reason. So I want to put a little more color into what you guys did. And from that, you experienced unbelievable growth and profitability, by the way, as a business. But here's a great example where the IT approach and the admin and the lean approach were to support the strategy of the business, not the other way around. So next time you guys hear somebody say, well, the system won't let us do that, you got to push back on that.
Well, the other benefit, Mark, was by doing that, we became experts in motion products, and we worked with our customers up front in the design, which helped leverage us to, not treat those components as a commodity. We actually added value to them in the design phase that allowed us to be able to support them. And with our lean transformation, we were able to deliver high quality products when they needed them.
Yeah.
And that's leverage revenue growth.
Yeah. So you really changed the profile of being a hardware supplier to in effect, a service provider.
Yep. Absolutely.
So Joe, there's probably a lot more to talk about. Maybe we should do some subsequent, more focused episodes on various aspects of how you think about administration and what are some of the challenges that we have and some of the issues that we've had over the years with, dealing with different types of businesses and different types of clients. Could you tell me a little bit about the regulatory? This will maybe end on that, and then I'd like to ask you one closing thought. But when you hear, well, we can't do that because industry standards or regulatory, or we can't do that because the Loctite supplier said it's got a cure for 5,000 hours. I'm exaggerating here, but Loctite always comes to mind. What's been your experience in that regard?
Well, I've worked certainly in aerospace and defense with weapons and all that. We had tight controls and requirements, specifications. Federal, pharmaceutical, we had to follow good manufacturing practices. You had to have validation before you could make a change. And if you want to make a change, you had to go through a revalidation. But there's three things that fall in line. First of all, we actually use the regulatory to help us drive towards flow, because we designed, as we did the product and went through our validation, the flow concepts. And because of that requirement, if you wanted to go back to a batch build and you wanted to change the process, you had to go through a revalidation, which is painful. It verifies that what you're doing, you can prove that it works, and it verifies that you have the proper steps in place, standard work. But we used it as an enabler to enforce what we want to do from a lean perspective. The second element was that, and your Loctite made me smile, because we were doing some work outside of Philadelphia, and we were doing a Kaizen event, and we had a 2-part epoxy where we were doing a potting operation. The operator says, we've got to figure out a way to do this. We ended up talking to the chief chemist at 3M on this epoxy, did a phone call with us, including the operator and the engineer. And what was happening is we had a 24-hour cure. Whenever you see things 8 hours, 24,
Oh yeah.
you challenge it because there probably wasn't a design of experiment to prove out that time.
You know, Joe, in a previous episode, I talk about one of my problem solving episodes about challenging everything. And what do they call it? They call it the Ronald Reagan trust but verify. I talked exactly about everything being divisible by 8 hours.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Cure time, dry time, whatever it may be, burning.
Yeah, so what we did on this is as we worked with the chief engineer, and he was fantastic that he spent time with us, but the time was to allow the degassing, getting the air bubbles out. And as we worked with the operator, she says, "What, when I make a cake, I bounce it up and down to get the air pockets out." He goes, "Absolutely. So how could we agitate this in order to move the gas out?" And we took a 24-hour process down to an hour and a half.
Well, again, Joe, this goes back to another one of my episodes on problem solving, solving problems at the lowest possible level and getting operator involvement. And I had so many in that episode, I talked about getting operator involvement because they're your best consultants, but interesting.
Yeah. And then the third item is IT is a service organization. And we actually use lean principles to drive that from a standpoint of who's our customer. It's the employee. How do we provide the best service? Again, SQDC in what we do, including if there's a ticket, do we get feedback from the customer? Did we indeed solve the problem? And B, do we use the data to prevent that problem from happening again? So match this level agreements, having standard work processes, getting feedback from the customer on how we're doing, actually helps drive the behavior of the organization to say all of us should be working collectively to make each product as effective as possible, with the end result being a quality product delivered to the customer when they need it.
You mean to tell me that IT isn't somebody you have to serve? I thought you had to, I thought they were the customer.
No, typically that's the finance people. No, well, even we did
There's some merit to that, by the way. Or what?
Yeah, in the pharmaceutical business, I ended up working with HR because I complained enough, and we said, "Who's our customer?" It was the employee, and it was amazing just that focus. And we looked at what made our customer unhappy. What could we do to fix that process for them? And it was amazing the engagement of the people doing the job, but also the engagement of their customer being happy with what they were getting.
Joe, subject for another day, but when most corporate functions need to be thinking that way in terms of who is my customer, right? And by the way, it's not always an easy question to answer. Right. Well, it comes to lean offices, and I have a whole series of episodes planned for that. Maybe you can join me on that. Lean offices that say that, yeah, the operations are their customer, but then if that's true, why are you auditing them? I never saw a supplier audit a customer, and so the notion that they're really customer focus is all talk for the most part, in most cases. And I see that so much. And you're right, that's got to be reversed 180 degrees to get that to be, working the right way. So, yeah. So, well, Joe, I tell you what, let's close. I think there's so much more to talk about here, but, maybe we can just close this right now. Let me ask you one final thought. If you were to leave the listeners with one thought as it relates to lean in admin and IT, what would that be? What would that one thought?
I'll tell you, it's a great question. I kind of walk away with this thought: fix the process before you automate. Someone wants to automate a process, understand the process, simplify it, then look at ways to automate.
Take the waste out.
Absolutely.
Don't
Or principles of lean.
Yeah.
Don't automate a bad process. I don't want to do something badly faster.
Yeah. 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 But that's efficient, isn't it?
It depends what your measurement of KPIs are, key performance indicators.
Yeah.
Again,
You
it might be like ECOs.
just opened up another Pandora's box. Let's leave it there. Joe, I really appreciate your time today, and I got to have you back on. There's so many other things we need to talk about. So, especially as it relates to the lead office, because you were there with me one week, you were part of creating the Danaher Business System, and you got the same scars I have on your back as I do, because we made a lot of mistakes, and but that's how we learned, and it was good. Still like that restaurant you took me in Switzerland. So that fondue, just a funny story. Joe says, "Hey, Mark, we're going to have fondue tonight." I said, "Fondue? I want something like that. I want a steak. I want something, And we're in this beautiful part of Switzerland up in the north, on the French border in La Chaux-de-Fonds, in the watchmaking district where all the great watches come from. And he took me to this farmhouse up in the mountains somewhere. I had a big motorcycle collection, and it was phenomenal. I still say today, Joe, that's the best meal I ever had in my life. I mean, I love lobster. I'm a New England guy, and I love Maine lobster, but I still say that was the best meal I ever had in my life. I was sitting there saying that, and maybe my expectations are so low that that's why it was so good, but it was phenomenal, and the atmosphere, everything. But so I'll never forget that one meal. So
Yeah, it's I love opportunities, and certainly being up in the mountains. It was the second restaurant I took my wife when I took her to Europe, and it brought back so many memories. But
she told me the first one was McDonald's, but let's not go there. Okay. Okay. Joe Rutz. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, reflections on this podcast, please email me at Mark, M-A-R-K, at lean911.com, mark@lean911.com. And we'll maybe have Joe back on and answer some of those questions that you might have or thoughts, and we'll go from there. So, Joe, thanks a lot. Have a great day. And we'll see you guys. This was episode, what did I say this was? 26?
26.
Episode 26 on the Lean 911 podcast. And you can find us on all the episodes on lean911.com. We're on YouTube and also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other ones that are out there. I think you get on Apple and they radiate out to everybody else. So you can find us there too. And we'll see you next time. Joe, thanks.
Thank you again, Mark.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Lean 911 podcast. I'll be happy to address your questions or feedback on future episodes. Email me at mark@lean911.com. You can check out our other episodes by visiting our website at lean911.com, our YouTube channel, wherever you listen to podcasts. This is your host, Mark DeLuzio. Thanks for listening.